My marriage, my choice. Would you recognise forced marriage?
Forced marriage is where you don't want to get married in the first place. It's not down to you, it's down to your mum and dad or anyone.
Some people don't understand what marriage is.
Would you recognise forced marriage? Here are two stories for you to consider. Shazia's family made arrangements for Shazia to travel home and get married. Is this forced marriage?
Hi, Mum.
Hi.
Where's Shazia? Thought she'd be home by now.
She's at the community centre. It's Anita's birthday.
Oh, she'll really like that.
Now, I haven't told you, but the date is fixed. So we're all going to be busy getting ready for the trip.
What trip? I don't remember you telling me anything about a trip.
We told you, the trip home. Remember we talked about it?
What, for Shazia's wedding? Seriously? I didn't know all that was arranged. I thought it was just an idea.
Yes, your uncle has found someone for her and it's all arranged.
But does she know?
No, not yet. We'll tell her nearer the time. You know how she gets if she's excited or nervous.
But who is he? Do we even know him? Mum, we can't just let her marry any old person. Who is he? How old is he?
We don't know him, but your uncle knows his grandfather. He's 32 and just a few years older than Shazia. He's a very nice young man from a respectable family.
But does he know anything about Shazia and what she's like?
Yes, that's all fine.
Really? He knows what she's like?
Your uncle has explained to the grandfather that she has some difficulties with some things, and they don't have a problem with that.
Some difficulties with some things? It's much more than that. She needs a lot of extra support. She can't always let people know what she needs. She doesn't understand how to look after herself or what to do to keep herself safe.
Now, Alia, please don't start again. We've been through this all before. We have to do this for Shazia. We need her to be settled with someone before we get too old to look after her. You know your dad isn't well now, and I have to look after him too. What if I get ill?
I've told you before, I'll take care of Shazia. I can't believe you're making these plans for her and she doesn't even know. No wonder you wait till she's not around to talk about it.
You are going off to university next year, Alia, and who knows what will happen after that. You're a bright girl. You'll get a good job and be married yourself.
It's just marriage is a big thing, a really big thing. It's for the rest of her life and I'm not sure Shazia knows what it's all about. What if she doesn't like him? What if he doesn't treat her well?
I've told you, he's a nice man and his family.
Yes, but what if she doesn't want to be with him? I don't think Shazia will really know what it's like to be a wife.
She will have to learn, like we all do. Being married will help her and make her better.
But Mum, she finds it really hard to learn, even little things. How's she going to understand a big thing like that? Have you asked the care manager what she thinks about it all?
It's nothing to do with anybody else. It's our business.
So it's not just Shazia. You haven't told anyone what's happening.
There is no need for that. I am a next of kin and I can decide. It's for the best. He will be good to her. He will look after her when we can't do it anymore.
It's not right.
Is this a forced marriage? Madar has also been told that he'll be getting married when he visits Somalia with his family in the summer. Is this a forced marriage?
So Madar, I wanted to meet with you today because your key worker at the employment project was really worried about you. Said that you're really sad at the moment. Is there something bothering you? Something you could tell me about? It would be good if you could. It must be pretty important to put you in such a low mood that you want to give up your job because you love your job.
Yeah, there's no point now. We're going to have to stop it anyway.
Why, Madar? Who says you've got to stop your work?
When I go away, I mean.
Where are you going?
Somalia.
I didn't know that. Are you visiting family?
Kind of, but a trip for me, really, though. Mum and Dad said they arranged it all for me. And everyone will be there.
That's interesting. Do you know why they've arranged it especially for you?
Yes, I'm not going.
Why is that then?
They say I'm going to get married and I don't want to.
Oh, I see. I can certainly understand why you feel upset about that, Madar. When did your mum and dad tell you about this?
They've been talking about it for ages, but I didn't think they really meant it. Now they're saying it's happened this summer. They showed me a photo of this woman. She looks nice and everything. She probably is nice, but I don't know her. I don't want to get married to a woman.
Have you told your mum and dad how you feel?
Yeah.
And what did they say?
They said, don't be silly, and it's for my own good. They said I have to go, and it's all arranged and I can't change it. Mum has been given some money. I don't want to go, but maybe I should. Maybe they're not specimen. I don't want them to be upset or be angry with me.
Is this a forced marriage? Part 2. Professional perspectives on forced marriage. What makes these forced marriages?
Forced marriage is a marriage which is entered into without the full and free consent of both of the parties involved.
A forced marriage is when somebody is coerced into marriage. It's not their choice to get married or to marry that person, but it's not their choice to get married at all.
For somebody with a learning disability, it might be that they don't have the capacity to consent to be married.
Forced marriage can be quite a misleading term for families because very often, sometimes families will say, well, our child isn't being forced to marry, they're wanting to consent to marriage. And that's where the issue of capacity is important, because it's important that families understand if a person lacks capacity, then technically in UK law it's a forced marriage.
Can people with learning disabilities consent to marriage?
People with learning disabilities can consent to marriage, yes, and we would very much support people with learning disabilities to marry where they have the capacity to consent.
It all depends upon the level of the learning disability and the level of their understanding, because ultimately that's what we're interested in. Do they understand what marriage means? Do they understand what it involves?
Understanding that marriage is something more than a wedding ceremony, that they've got the ability to weigh up the consequences, thinking about what does it mean to be married.
Do they understand that marriage can involve sexual relationships, that it's intended to last for the rest of their lives, ideally, that there are issues around property and their ownership of property, and various other legal implications of being married and consequences of that.
Are they able to weigh that up? Are they able to think about the pros and cons of getting married? And are they able to communicate the decision that they've made?
So, for instance, sometimes I will meet people with learning disabilities who may actually know what they want to wear, what they want to eat. And on appearance, it may look like that actually they have capacity because they know how to make day-to-day choices. But actually, if I was to ask them, what is a marriage? And if they would say to me, oh, it's having a party, oh, it's going on holiday, then I would have alarm bells ringing.
And that's where a forced marriage comes in, and it's very much done for the protection of the person with learning disabilities, because there are cases where the person with a learning disability who is married and doesn't understand enough about marriage can experience quite abusive relationships in a context in which they lack control.
Why is forced marriage against the law?
When a family arranges a marriage for somebody that doesn't have the capacity to consent, the law says that that's a forced marriage. And that's because the person isn't entering into the marriage fully understanding what it is that they're going to be expected to do. They don't understand what the marriage relationship is all about. Often families wouldn't see this as a forced marriage because they're making a decision that they think is the best decision for their son or daughter.
Forced marriage is against the law in part because the United Kingdom has international obligations under the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, And that stresses that the right to marry is central to how a person feels about themselves, about their sense of dignity, and about their ability to make choices about how they live their life and who they share their lives with. And so the law is there to try and support individuals' own choices and their ability to choose.
It could be deemed as a human rights abuse. It can be deemed in the terms of domestic abuse because somebody's been forced to do something against their will. They might not have the capacity to understand what's happening. It could lead to potentially to physical violence or emotional coercion.
When you go further, it's really about protecting people who are vulnerable. So it's part of safeguarding. It's really important to have effective laws that protect people.
The outcomes could be conviction in eyes of the law, which could involve imprisonment potentially.
Why don't people recognise that forced marriage is illegal?
People might not recognise that forced marriage is illegal because if they're in a family, they may have always thought their son or daughter or brother or sister will always get married, and that's the thing that has to happen.
People might believe that their son or daughter marrying someone will result in the effects of a learning disability being diminished because this person will now be able to get on and do things and might have a family and perhaps there might be a belief that the learning disability will go down, will go away, which unfortunately isn't the case, and learning disabilities aren't healed by marriage.
Often they are trying to help the person that they are trying to arrange the marriage for. They may do it for reasons of protection. They may be worried about what will happen to their son or daughter or relative after they die. They may believe that the best way to protect them and care for them is to arrange a marriage partner. The difficulty is that that doesn't recognise the rights of the person who is going to be entered into the marriage to make a choice. And more particularly, it doesn't recognise that some people simply can't make that choice because they don't have sufficient understanding.
Sometimes families will say to me, I'm the next of kin. And they think that they can make life-changing decisions on behalf of the young person. Sometimes families will say to me, Mandy, I'm the appointee. And I'll say, that means nothing. If I have a power of attorney and I have to say to them that's about managing finances, that's around medical treatment, it does not give you the right to make life-changing decisions on somebody's behalf, and especially around marriage. Nobody can consent on somebody else's behalf.
Part 3. Motivations and consequences. If forced marriage is against the law, why do some people do it?
So we've seen two young people that might be at risk of forced marriage. Why is it, do you think, that parents choose marriage for their son or daughter?
Well, as a family carer myself, I can completely identify with why people might have concerns about the future and what that might look like for their child, who's going to care for them. You get to a certain age and you think to yourself, well, I'm not able to do all the things that I want to do now. What happens if I can't carry on being a carer? What am I going to do then? And you start to worry then about, what's going to happen? Who's going to take care of your child?
So do you think some people might choose a husband or a wife for their son or daughter because they want a carer for them? They want somebody to come in and look after them when they're no longer able to do it?
I can see why they might consider that, given the concerns and the fact that they might not engage with services or know what's out there.
And that is a real issue for some communities, the lack of trust, not knowing what services are there. Are their needs going to be met? And the needs could be something as simple as dietary needs. Are the person able to go to the place of worship, for instance? But there's also an issue around where families want to get rid of the stigma of disability. So actually, if you're married or if you have children, you seem somewhat normal. Don't like using that word, but actually that's a word that people use in some communities. So actually, it removes the stigma of disability.
So people choose a husband or wife for their son or their daughter because they think they're going to be the best person to care for them. The care will be in the family. Yeah. But also it removes that stigma of disability as well. So it means that their child is doing what everybody else's child is doing in terms of getting married and living with their husband or wife.
And also they don't recognise it probably as a forced marriage because, again, it comes around to the issue of capacity, because they'll see it as an arranged marriage. We're doing an arranged marriage. We're doing a good thing here. So it's about bringing it back to say to family, well, actually, your young person that you're looking after doesn't understand what a marriage is.
And of course, if they don't understand what a marriage is and they're not able to say yes to that marriage or no to that marriage, then in the eyes of the law, that marriage is a forced marriage.
Totally a forced marriage. And then again, families will sometimes say, I'm the appointee, I'm the next of kin. And it's again then saying to families, just because you're the appointee for DWP benefits or you're the next of kin because you're a parent doesn't guarantee that actually when it comes to making decisions that you have that right.
So it can be difficult, can't it? Because parents often think that they're doing the right thing and they're wanting to care for their son or their daughter, and they might not realise that actually they could be breaking the law, or that making that choice might mean that their son or their daughter might be badly treated by the husband and wife, because we know of stories where people have been raped, they've been sexually assaulted, physically assaulted.
And we've had cases of Rani's mum who went to a local community temple who was asked to arrange a marriage, and actually the mum thought it was a good match because actually the guy needed a visa into the country. He would promise to care for her, but actually within weeks of the marriage, she was forced to have sex, she was financially exploited, all her benefits he took, she was physically assaulted, and then he was calling her awful wicked names. And then when she went back home to say to mum, and mum was like, but he's your husband, sex is a part of marriage. And at that time, she had a bit of an understanding of sex, though, Anne, but didn't,
So parents might not think through what the consequences might be, and they might not see that their son or their daughter could be harmed by this. We also know that there can be difficulties for the person without the learning disability as well, who's brought into the house to act as a carer, and that person might be treated as a servant by the family and might not understand what rights they have either.
I think now when we look at legislation, we look at Under Care Act, modern day slavery is a part of the safeguarding processes and procedures for a lot of local authorities now. So when we have spouses that have come over from whatever part of the world, they've been promised a life here, and some money will probably be sent back to the family. So that person's kind of tied because actually it's kind of helping their family in that community. But a forced marriage is a violation of somebody's human rights. We need families to understand that actually we don't have rights to make life-changing decisions on someone's behalf. We can't do that, and even if we're mum and dad.
Yeah, well, no matter how well-intentioned, the law is the law, and people's rights are people's rights, aren't they?
I'm wondering what needs to happen to change this, and is it about better publicity of services? Is it about helping families to understand what the alternatives might be? So getting families to talk to the social worker or the GP or the nurse that might be involved to really think through what some of the alternatives to marriage might be.
I've found that because we've engaged with services, we started to talk to them about, well, what might we be able to access in the future? What might the future look like? That we've got a lot more peace of mind. I mean, we've got a great family support network, but who's to say that's around forever?
Parents will say to me, I can't make my other son and daughter take on the responsibility. So this is why we go and marry our son and daughter off. And they actually don't see what they're doing is wrong. And I think it's about trying to help them to understand, realise that there is a lot more kind of low-level support out there. And actually also, sometimes people can live in the family home and actually have carers coming in to support you. And I think that people don't recognise that those are real options.
So the messages are quite clear, aren't they? In that no matter how well-intentioned parents are in choosing marriage for their son or a daughter with a learning disability, if they're not able to choose that for themselves and actually say that's what they want to do or they don't want to do, that marriage is actually a forced marriage and it's against the law. Parents might not understand that actually there are consequences for their son or daughter as well. So they might be physically assaulted or sexually assaulted, or they might be financially abused. And actually there are consequences for the person without the learning disability as well, in that they might not know that the person that they're marrying has a learning disability or has care and support needs, or that they might be treated as a servant within the family home.
What are the consequences of forced marriage?
There are legal implications for forcing somebody to marry. It's against the law and it carries a maximum prison sentence of 7 years.
Well, the law says that you can commit the offence of forced marriage in 2 primary ways. The first is that if you intend to cause a person who doesn't understand the concept of marriage to enter into a marriage, that can be an offence. You don't need to use any pressure or force, coercion. You don't need to threaten violence or anything like that. Just the fact that they don't understand marriage and you cause them to enter into a marriage is sufficient. The other way that you can commit an offence is if you deceive somebody into going overseas, and then once they get there, you intend that they enter into a marriage agreement. It doesn't matter whether you remain at home and the person goes separately from you, provided your intention is to get them to enter into a marriage when they get there. And what a marriage means is not an English marriage under English law. It can include any form of marriage ceremony which is recognised overseas, and it also can include a marriage which is recognised by people's customs. And therefore it's a very wide and all-encompassing term.
There are consequences both for the person with the learning disability, who might become a victim of abuse, could be abused in a range of ways, and for their spouse, who may not realise that actually they're being brought into the family to care for their husband or wife and possibly care for their parents as well.
A survivor's story.
My story is I'm a survivor now. I've gone through quite a lot. When I was little, I had dreams of, who my husband would be, how we'd get married, where we would live. And I was born in England, so being British, I was brought up with English people, and we all had dreams of our white wedding and how it would be. When my parents told me, you've got to take Wednesday off, and I said, why? And they said, you're getting married. All my dreams were just shattered in an instant. I didn't get to choose my life partner. And to me, a life partner is someone that you can build dreams with, build a home with, build a family with, in all aspects of your life. And I found it really hard that my parents were forcing me to be with someone, not just mentally and physically, but everything. My husband, but he was mentally impaired, so he didn't actually realise that he was actually getting married. So I actually felt really sorry for him. He was actually quite a nice person, but he was actually forced to be with me. I realised that he had some sort of learning disability from the way he would talk and behave, like not going to the toilet or having a bath until his mum gave him permission. He wasn't able to tie shoelaces, he wasn't able to read and write, and like the way his mum would treat him and the way he was playing with his food and regurgitate his food and just spit it out. I just thought that's just not adult behaviour. We were kept apart in the marital home, and I stayed with his parents and his brothers. I was put to work straight away, cooking, cleaning, constantly from 3 o'clock in the morning until midnight. I wasn't allowed to sleep, I wasn't allowed to eat or join the family. He was just kept apart from me. My mother-in-law, she would stand by the bedroom door and she would force him to rape me, and he didn't understand what rape was, so she would take him downstairs and make him watch pornography and then, get him upstairs and force him to hit me. In the weeks ending up to the marriage ending, the family wanted dowry from my parents, and my parents couldn't afford the dowry, so they refused to give me food, and for 10 days I hadn't eaten, so I ended up in hospital, and so my parents finally gave in and brought me home, even though it was shame on the family for me to divorce. But after 5 months of hell, I finally came home. I believe that when you're forcing someone to get married, that is wrong, because everyone should have their own choice on who they marry, because they're picking their life partner, who they're going to share their life with. By forcing someone, that is the wrong thing to do.
Part 4. Key messages from professionals and people with learning disabilities. Key messages for families.
There are a number of key messages that we'd like people to understand. I think the first one is understanding that men and women with learning disabilities are both forced to marry.
We need to be very clear that actually people with learning disabilities have the same right as any other person in the UK. Just because they have an intellectual impairment or a disability does not mean that they don't have the same rights and choices as anyone else.
When somebody becomes 18 years of age, they are legally deemed an adult, and in the eyes of the UK law, that means that they are the only person who can make that decision for themselves. Getting married is one decision that nobody can make for anybody else.
Another key message for families, I think, is to ask for help about matters to do with their son or daughter's future. Families and the person with learning disabilities and all professionals involved and services all have to work together to help that person find a way forward that's satisfying for them so they can have a good life and they can feel valued and be part of their community without being married.
So I think the key messages for families to take away from this are not to presume that because your son or daughter has a learning disability that they can't get married, or that services are going to rush in and stop your child getting married. However, it's important to recognise that it's possible that because your child has a learning disability, any marriage involving your son or daughter could be classed as a forced marriage. Therefore, it's important to think with services, to speak to your local social services, to speak to community learning disability teams, to inquire about capacity assessments, to think about if there's any work that could be done to support your son and daughter developing capacity to consent to marriage.
People must have the capacity to consent in order to agree to be married. Families often have the best interests of their son or daughter at heart and believe that they're doing the right thing in finding somebody for their son or daughter to marry, because that person will then care for them for the rest of their lives. But often they don't understand that what they're doing is against the law and might not be in the best interest of their son or daughter.
Things to remember. Everyone has a right to choose who they marry.
It's my decision who I get married to.
I decide when I get married.
But other people can support us, but not decide.
In my right, if I don't want to get married, I don't have to.
People who are forced to marry get hurt.
People who are forced to marry, they get hurt.
Get hurt physically and emotionally.
People might be very unhappy with being with somebody they don't want to be with.
So sometimes they'll have no money.
People left on their own.
They may have nowhere to live if the marriage doesn't work out.
Forcing someone to marry is a crime.
Forced marriage is wrong against the law.
Forced marriage is wrong, is a crime.
The family get in trouble with the law.
Tell someone if you have been or are being forced to marry.
You tell all sorts of people if you're being forced to get married.
You can go to the police station for information.
Solicitor, the staff,
key workers,
the social worker,
doctor,
bosses, teacher,
or brother and sister,
and your friends.
You can also tell the forced marriage unit.
Remember, you don't have to put up with this. If you or someone you know is at risk of forced marriage or has been the victim of forced marriage, contact the police on 101, or if it's an emergency, dial 999. You can also contact your local social services team or the forced marriage unit on 0207 008 0151. If you are a parent or carer, and you're worried about who will look after your child or family member when you're not able to, contact your local social services team or your local learning disability team. You can also speak to your GP or local health services. If you want help to decide if your son or daughter should or could get married, contact your local social services team